Kia ora, I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail.
The government's promising certainty for polytechs by the end of the year, amid fears more courses and teachers are about to be cut.
Hardly any of them can survive without, as I say, making major cuts to staffing and major cuts to provision, major cuts to the opportunities that our communities will have. So for staff, it's almost unbelievable that they don't have any certainty.
Vocational training and the polytech sectors are on edge.
It's not good enough for a minister not to have a clear direction by now.
The minister has been warned of change fatigue draining the tertiary education sector. She's been told that students are now opting not to enrol, worried their campuses could close.
Quite frankly, this government needed to have a clear idea of what it was doing, but it's dragging on.
Polytechnics and vocational institutes train our future builders, electricians, mechanics, chefs, fashion designers, game developers, film directors, childcare workers, and so much more. They offer practical, hands-on style training, often while students are learning on the job. That's particularly important if you're heading into a fast-changing environment like the digital or creative worlds. But after more than 4 years of upheaval driven by ideological changes, first with Labour's moves to create a centralised mega polytechnic in the form of Te Pukanga, then by this government's plans to tear it all down again, it's just a giant mess.
We've been playing with the polytech training sector for ideological reasons now from two different directions for an extended period of time. This has led to a bleed of talent, capability, capacity, and not only that, it's kind of put people off from getting involved in vocational tech training and so on. That's a bad thing. It's a bad outcome for the country.
I think the vocational education system in particular has been in such a state of consultation and disruption through the changes that both the previous government and now this government have been looking to make, that it would be hard for there not to be an impact on students.
We need more skilled individuals who have trade skills, who have, the various different skills that go into a polytech. There is a place for polytechs, there's a place for trades training, and there's a place for university. There's always a mix. But we've, in effect, tried to save a few pennies, and the consequence of saving a few pennies has been a level of confusion and disorganisation, which has not had a good outcome on the sector as a whole, and that's a great shame.
And I know that the aim is to fix the system, but it seems we end up in this cycle of constantly trying to tweak with something and not give the changes that are made chance to embed so that we can actually see, is this working? Get the impact of the investment that's already been made in trying to improve the system rather than throwing that out and starting again.
Forestry, performing arts, health, hairdressing, journalism, apiculture, brewing, truck driving, just a handful of the occupations where some training courses have disappeared while the reorganisations continue. And in the latest government announcement, two entire sectors have fallen off the radar. The creative industries, which generate $4.1 billion in export revenue and support over 117,000 jobs, and the digital technology sector, a high-growth industry that Kiwis are excelling in globally. It's worth $13.4 billion in exports a year and contributes more than $17 billion to GDP.
They're the economic drivers. They're the ones that are going to help us to diversify our economy, and probably we're going to be the ones leading the economic growth that we need and the more productive jobs.
That's Paula Browning from We Create, and I'll be talking to her a bit later. But first, I'll try to make sense of the changes with Professor John Tukey, an AUT academic who deals with construction industries in developing advanced trades training. He isn't happy with the current reorganisation, but he wasn't thrilled with the last attempt to change things either, when in 2020 there was a rethink on how polytechnics worked.
When everything became amalgamated into a super-duper polytechnic, Te Pukanga, that could sort of see in all directions and so on. The idea was that it was all about consolidation, centralisation and reduction in duplication. And that's where it started to go a little bit haywire.
So it this idea of te pukenga was not 100% on point.
Well, the concept I would not argue with. It seems like there's a lot of duplication, and in fairness, there is. So, for example, if you look here in Auckland is the largest city in the country, obviously, and we've got various different institutions, all of which offer training in various different skill sets and so on. But you've got some rather bizarre situations, like, for example, we have outpost colleges, notionally colleges, but they're relatively small organizations for all the polytechnics around the nation. The idea being that they're trying to increase their total enrollments by dabbling their toes in the Auckland market. Now, in and of itself, obviously that's kind of duplication, right? Because they could be staying in institutions who are actually home based in Auckland rather than going to an outside institution that just happens to be there. So there was a lot of people standing on each other's toes going back a few years now. And the idea of centralizing things, reducing duplications, had a lot of appeal, and there seemed to be an opportunity to save some money and get economies of scale.
The government is proposing a mass merger of the country's 16 polytechs, amid concerns about their financial stability and enrolment numbers. This new entity would also become responsible for on-the-job training and apprenticeships, a role currently filled by industry training organisations.
Practically what happened was that when they started to consolidate things, all of a sudden the internal costs of the organisation became a major focus. How do you get different areas of the various different amalgamated polytechnics in effect to pay their way? And you started to see an escalating sort of closure in programs and so on. If you look back at the history of that time period from 2020 onwards, there was a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth associated with the reforms, because we started to see closures, and as people started to get closures took place, obviously the heart get ripped out of rural communities and God knows what else as the ripple effects take place, and yeah, that's kind of where it went a little bit off the rails. And then obviously the Ardern government wasn't returned, and in the new environment, the incoming government have looked towards reversing some of these ideas.
Te pukenga will be disestablished by next year. John Tukey says it will mean a forced amalgamation of vocational programs with a more traditional polytech 2 to 3 year degree and diploma courses.
And getting everything forced into that sort of one size fits all, or more correctly, one size fits nobody type of framework. And, because there are very, very different sort of ways of doing business between a slightly more academic focus of the traditional polytech and the exclusively vocational training. I mean, how they are accredited, how they are evaluated, how their assignments are assessed, and all the rest of it are done by a different level of expectation. The difference between an ABCD grade or a competent, not competent, yes or no, thumbs up or down for a module, for example. So, there are different expectations in place for both sides. And as I say, conceptually, there was opportunities, but practicalities, probably not the same. Oh, and by the way, not everybody in society is equipped for an academic type of qualification. And, unfortunately, over many years, there's been an accelerating expectation of qualification. So we've got everybody's got a degree now in all areas, when practically there are an awful lot of areas of industry and activity where good skilled trades training is by far and away a better proposition in terms of return on investment for the time spent, and it ultimately provides folks with a career trajectory which is going to be around for long after I'm gone.
That brings us to an industry that is most definitely providing a return on investment.
Based on 2022 numbers, we're exporting about $4.1 billion of digital creativity all over the world. And the joy of what we do is you make it once and you sell it 1 million times. Music's a great example of that, as are video games. And the productivity levels in those industries are really high. So their earnings per employee last year were nearly $500,000, which is crazy compared to, maybe some of our more traditional industries.
Paula Browning is the chair of We Create, an alliance that covers all sorts of creative and tech industries, from music to publishing to interactive media and fashion. Industries that she says are being sidelined by these changes. Industries that thought they were making progress after the original shake-up in 2020.
So the part of it that we've been focused on that is more directly related to our workforce needs is the proposed changes to the workforce development councils. Now, they were new organisations that were set up in 2022 as part of that review of vocational education that started in 2020. We had to, along with the digital sector, had to fight tooth and nail to get creative and digital as part of that system. So we have a workforce development council who the name is Toi Mai, and they are responsible for vocational education for creative, cultural, tech and recreation. In the proposed model that the government's looking at now, creative, tech and business skills are going back under NZQA. So they won't have one of the new industry standards boards that are proposed.
So here are the new industry standards boards. There's automotive, construction, infrastructure, food and fibre, service, manufacturing and technology, social and community.
So the technology in with manufacturing is not the sort of digital technology I'm talking about. And I think if you look at the other names on that list, they look pretty traditional. We're not thinking about the sort of skills that are needed, not just for the creative and tech sectors, but also creative and tech skills are needed right across the economy. So even if you are working in construction, you need to know about technology. And that's where a lot of the productivity comes from as well. And can we find artificial intelligence in any of those industries? Again, that's where the skills of the future are going to come from. And what we're doing with these proposals is looking to put those industries of the future back into the past. And it just doesn't make sense.
Paula also points out that the timeline for all this is really tight.
So there's separate work happening to look at what happens with the polytechs, including moving to a federation model for some of them that are not financially viable that will come under open polytech. And then the workforce development councils, which there's 6 of them currently, that were only stood up in 2022, are proposed to be disestablished by the end of 2025. So we're talking 7 months. And industry standards boards are going to be stood up on the 1st of January 2026 somehow to take over only the standard setting part of what workforce development councils do now. So a much more limited function, which obviously costs less, and it does seem that the driving force behind this is purely cost rather than actual workforce planning.
But to unentangle something that's only just been set up and then set up new bodies in haste, inevitably this is going to cost more.
Well, and not just cost to government, cost to industry as well. So if I think about We Create, we are a tiny 2 part-time people organisation that has been involved in the advocacy of this for 6 years now. And bringing forward industry need and consultation processes for industry organisations are a lot of work. And it does feel like we haven't given the workforce development councils the opportunity to embed the trajectory that they're on. And the regulatory impact statement for the whole process said they can't see anything wrong with workforce development councils, but we're pulling them down and then starting something else. And even the thing that's proposed to start up, the industry standards boards, are only really planned for 2 years. And then in 2028, we're going to do something different again. So the lack of certainty that gives employers and industries in terms of developing their workforces in conjunction with the vocational education system, that's really hard to work through at a time when skills are absolutely what we need to be thinking about growing.
So your industry, the creative and digital industry, where do you sit in the new regime?
We don't. We sit under NZQA. So there'll be no workforce planning. There will be no further skill development. It will be, these are the existing qualifications, and we will continue to tick the box on just those.
So if someone comes out of school and they want to go eventually work for Weta Digital and they want to learn how to program video games, do they have a clear path mapped out for them that will work?
Not in vocational education, no. And not where vocational education is a part of their learning. They'll be wholly reliant on being able to get an entry-level job with potentially limited skills to start with, and then, try and find an employer who is able to support their learning. And part of the other context for the creative and digital sectors is it's highly self-employed. And 97% or something of our industry is SMEs, so less than 5 employees. So you don't have that scale of employers. Weta is an outlier example because of the scale that they've got, but not all of the others have, the ability to absorb on-job training without some external vocational education support.
In this economic reality, if you're 2 people working out of someone's kitchen, you're not going to take on an apprentice, right?
No. The apprenticeships are one model. We've been looking with Toimai, the Workforce Development Council, at what other models might be that do fit in that situation and how the vocational education system can support that with industry. This isn't about the industry thinking that, the vocational education system should do all of its training. That's never been the vocational education system's model. But if you think about it in parallel as I do at home with somebody who's in the construction industry who has a whole heap of electrical apprentices, the electrical industry knows that the skill development that they need is supported by a government system that has standards, that develops the country's workforce, and they benefit from that.
Although I see that they're actually arguing that they need their own.
They are. And look, it's what we've learnt from working with the workforce development councils, and some of what people are saying now is obviously a response to the proposals that have come through that are just so out of line with what industry needs that it's hard to find what you would say about a system that is not, a proposed system that isn't really what your industry needs. The changes are meant to be industry-led. Workforce development councils are already industry-led and have provided a massive amount of interface with industry to understand industry's evolving needs. And that takes time to build up as well. So it just feels like we're just getting to the point after 3 years where these workforce development councils have started to fly, and we're going to pull it all down.
ISBs, in your view, won't cut the mustard?
They have a more limited role. And importantly, it sounds like they'll have about half the funding that the workforce development councils had. So their ability to do the sorts of things that help inform the industry training, including the interfacing with industry, developing qualifications, approving those qualifications, and then working with providers on the delivery side of that. It feels like the system is being shrunk for what seems like purely financial reasons without understanding at a system level what the system needs.
And you've been shrunk right out of it.
We have been shrunk to the point where we don't really exist.
How short-sighted is this? I mean, the figures are astounding that we get from this industry.
It's worse than short-sighted. It's almost like operating blind. It's hard to understand in a country like New Zealand that is inherently outward-facing and with other government priorities around looking to grow. We target triple exports by 2030. With a goal like that, why are we cutting out a part of the education system that's going to help to deliver all of that? And I think particularly, as somebody who's a graduate of the vocational education system from quite some time ago, the importance of vocational education and the skills development that happens there, that's where a lot of the training happens that solves the big problems we've got, including the economic problem we've got. And we're pulling apart a piece of it that was working for seemingly no good reason.
With all this disruption, what happens in the next couple of years to candidates who are coming out of school and would normally or have previously gone down this training route?
The Minister's been keen to say that there will be certainty for existing work-based learning. It's hard to see how that will happen when there isn't actually a transition plan from workforce development councils to the industry standards boards yet. It's coming, apparently, but we've got 7 months. And for some of us, there is no transition. It's just, you're out of here. And that just feels like we're doing something in haste that we are going to regret in the not too distant future.
What about students? What do they want?
The learners in our sector want to develop the skills that they need and to be able to access vocational education in the same way that their friends who are going into the trades or, going into industries that are more traditionally supported. They want to have these highly paid, highly productive jobs. So I think our kids want jobs where they feel they're doing great things and where the thing that makes them special about them is able to be utilised. And some of that is creativity, and a lot of it will be about technology. That's their world. Some of us have had to retrofit learning about technology. Our kids have been born with it in their world, and we need to have the sort of jobs that lets them make the most of that, and that's the creative and tech jobs.
Meanwhile, as these ideology-based changes take place, there's one certainty. John Tukey says an awful lot of money is being wasted.
The problem with this sort of situation is that, in effect, what we're doing is we are holding hostage the adequate in favour of the perfect. We just need a workable system, something that's going to be able to deliver. Actually, if we incentivise businesses to invest in trades training, for instance, then we're actually going to get a much better outcome, because if multiple businesses can see that they're going to gain a much better outcome from getting good trade training taking place in a particular region, they will invest and donate and provide additional services and support to whatever the facilities that are put in place are. So, yeah, we should be incentivizing it. We should be offering more tax breaks. We should be offering grants to apprentices who are looking to develop the skills and get the tickets and so on, to be able to make this go forward. And it would be nice to have some national awards, incentivizing people to get involved in trades.
That's interesting, the phrase holding hostage the adequate in order to achieve the perfect. So are you saying that basically let's just get systems in place that work before we aim for the nirvana of the perfect system?
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to burn through an awful lot of goodwill in the trades training world to a point where those journeyman type of operators who've been around for a long period of time, they're just going to throw their hands up and say, enough, not going to play anymore.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was engineered by Phil Benge and edited by Mark Jennings. Thanks to John Tukey and Paula Browning. I'm Alexia Russell. Ka kite.